on to our next speaker for today, which is Ms. Harsimran Kaur, who will share her journey with us, of course. She is a research analyst for sustainable mobility at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, which is CEEW, and MTech in Renewable Energy Engineering and Management. She carries 7 years of experience in research on the issues with the adoption of EVs. There's India's energy transition. She's worked on analysis of solar rooftop PV plants, among a lot of others. So we really welcome you, Harsimran, and over to you.
Thank you, Janvi. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, cool. Can you confirm if the screen is visible?
Yes, it is visible. Yeah, it's perfect now.
Cool. Thank you. So thanks for the introduction, Janvi. Yeah, I'm Harsimran Kaur. I'm a research analyst at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Just a small correction, Janvi, though I don't have 7 years of experience, but I do have 3 years of public policy research experience in the space.
I'm sorry, I'm so sorry.
No problem. I feel great after hearing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, CEW is among Asia's leading policy research institutions. We use data, integrated analysis, and strategic outreach to explain and change the use, reuse, and misuse of resources. Our work spans across 7 focus areas, and there's a dedicated Center for Energy Finance at CEW. And I belong in the Sustainable Mobility team at CEW, which falls under Technology, Finance, and Trade, which is an emerging area in the organization. Now, before I directly jump into what is public policy research, how does sustainable mobility come in, and what are the different skills or courses or jobs that you could be looking at, I want to give you a brief overview over what is the climate change thing and where is it placed in the larger climate change debate that we keep having. I think Zaman greatly captured the urgency of the climate change and did touch upon the IPCC report that was recently released, right, which did highlight some of the great findings on how it's become more important to act on sustainability now more than ever, right? It highlights, first of all, that in 2020 we've already crossed the 1 degree mark compared to the average global temperature levels in 1850 to 1900. And if you are being careless, the orange line being the line of carelessness, we are doomed. And if we ever want to bend the curve and make Earth a better place for us to live, we'll have to make a serious dent in the curve. And that is possible if we work on sustainability. And the time to act on it is now. We can't delay it any further. So what are the major sources of the carbon emissions in India, right? If you see the pie chart on the right, it shows the 2019 data on what were the sector-wise major CO2 emission contributors in the country. The largest share is by the power sector, followed by industrial sector, and then there's a transport sector at the 3rd place, followed by building sector, agriculture, and the other energy-related sectors. So now, because I'm working in the transport sector, most of my examples and most of my conversation and discussion is going to be on the transport side. I'd like to have a first poll question, Janvi, if you can float it.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Audience, what do you think? Which is the most highest CO2 emitting mode of transport? As per the latest data by International Transport Forum, cars occupy the largest. By the way, the units are million tons of CO2 emissions. I'm sorry, I did not put it here. But cars are the major share, followed by 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, buses, and then trucks, air, ships, and rail. Yeah. So distribution. Now that you know that this is the current state of the transport sector emissions, can we have the next poll question as well? If you were to travel from one place to another within your city, which mode of transport would be most eco-friendly? Yeah, so this is the result. The least is obviously walking, but obviously that was not in your alternative options. if you see car and diesel, right, at the bottom end of the bar chart, they are the highest carbon footprint mode of transport. They emit the most amount of emissions. This takes into account not only the operation bit of it, right? It also takes into account the manufacturing part of it. Manufacturing of the cars that are manufactured for diesel and the gasoline engines. Then if you'll notice that even a hybrid car is slightly less carbon intensive, followed by a plug-in hybrid, where you have a diesel engine also, and you can charge your car with a plug. That's the plug-in hybrid. So it's still a bit lower. And then you see there's an electric car. Electric car is still at 99, and you still have a lot of options under it, right? Then now if you compare electric car with a bus which runs on diesel or a CNG, it's still quite less carbon intensive. But if it's an electric bus, it's even lesser, right? And if you want to travel a longer distance, you can use your local train or a metro train. And if your metro train also has an underground network, then it's still a bit better compared to your electric cars. So all this noise about electric cars and electric vehicles and so on is bullshit. We should actually be looking at different modes of transport and different alternative fuels in these different alternative modes of transport, and not really electric cars, right? Sorry, I'm not able to see my. Okay, so what is policy research what is policy research and what are the think tanks? So there's this definition by Professor James McGann at the UPenn, and I think that his definition that he provides as what the think tanks are is pretty good, and captures all the work that I do and all of my colleagues do at CW. It acts as a bridge between the academic and the policy making communities. So you have an academic research society that carries out rigorous research, different models and so on, they deploy, and then they say, this is what the impact of this particular policy will look like. This is what the technology we must be looking at, and this is not a good technology to be looking at because it's still much more carbon intensive. So they do that kind of very high class academic research. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the policy makers, which do not have so much of the rigor research capacity, but they are making most of the important policy decisions for the country. And these are your government departments, these are your Niti Aayog, the government policy think tanks, or these are also your ministries and so on, right? So think tank is something between both of them. It acts as a bridge between both of them. And it serves in the public interest. So we work for the public. We serve as an independent voice. I think this is very important. We do not advocate, we do not lobby for any lobby group or anything, but we do our independent research. If we find that if a research says electric cars are good, then we say they are good. If we find that they're not good, then that's what we go for, even if that means going against the current government policies and the current government. We believe in our objective research and in our independent voice. And we translate the applied and the basic research that most of these academic institutions carry out into simpler language that these policy makers and the public are able to understand, right? So that's where the bridge comes into the picture. So if I had to summarize most of the work that policy research institutions do into 2 points, I think this is what we do. We just analyze the impact of the public policies that are already out there. So for an example would be, if there's a subsidy on the LPG, then we try to analyze whether it's really impacting, whether objective that for which the subsidy has been introduced is actually being met, whether people are actually being able to afford LPG for their cooking practices at their homes. And the second is, if it's not, then what are the alternative policy options? If a subsidy is not working, then what else should we be looking at? And it's not about just the policy tools, but also about the different technologies. So if an electric car is not good, then what are the other options? And if there are other options, then what is the right amount of option? There can't be just one option for the whole public transport. You can't have, all cars should be electric, and not all cars, but all modes of transport should be electric. Maybe maybe the natural gas makes more sense for the long duty trucks. Maybe electric cars make more sense. Maybe buses may, if you have battery fitted vehicles, or if you have an overhead line for your electric buses, maybe that makes sense. So we evaluate all these different strategies and all these different technology solutions, and try to identify what are the alternative policy options if the current ones are not working. And that starts with identifying what the policy problem is, which is covered in the first aspect. So now that you, okay, so I'm sorry about the animation. So where are the think tanks placed in this broad green economy, right? You have the policymakers. These include your ministries, your government departments, and so on. And then you have your industry, financiers, academia, research centers, and people, right? So these collectively, right, we are placed somewhere between them. Now, the objective of this diagram is not to show that we directly work under the government and we are above the industry, above the financiers, and above the academia, research centers, and people, but we work with them. We would be somewhere in the fine divide that's there between the policymakers and these people. We, like I said, we evaluate different policy strategies, right? So that's something that we do for the government. When we evaluate what are the different technologies, we consult with the people from the industry, right, to understand what are the what other alternate options make sense scientifically. What are the different financing arrangements that will be needed? What is the amount of the capital investment that will be needed to put up a manufacturing facility for it? That's where we interact with financiers. Then we interact with academia to see, understand what is the impact of a particular subsidy or a particular GST incentive that we bring about on the sales of electric vehicles and so on. How would that impact 10 years down the line on the India's economy? That is somewhere where academia comes in. Then there are these research centers that carry out R&D on what are the different, what are the different materials that could be used to manufacture batteries in India, because India does not have so much of lithium. What are the alternative materials that are available indigenously in India that could be used to manufacture batteries? That is where research centers come in. And of course, people. How can we motivate people to shift to alternative mode options? How can I motivate my mom to shift from a scooter to a bus? That's where the people come in. So this is where the think tank is placed. Now that you have a broad overview of what a policy research and looks like, and also where it is placed, where the transport sector comes in the policy research area. So the public policy research in the transport sector looks something like this. You start with an eternal question on how do we decarbonize the transport sector? That's the very first question we start with, right? And then you have these two different strategies under it. One is you can choose for an alternative mode of transport. The other option is you can opt for alternate fuels, right? So it's not like it's one or the other. These are the two different strategies which have to go hand in hand. So if I go for the first strategy, these are the different modes of transport one can opt for. And also for the purpose of this presentation, I'm only focusing on the urban transport. There's also freight transport and so on, and long distance transport. That's a wider transport sector issue, but urban transport may you have these options. And in this, we try to evaluate what's the best strategy, which one is the least cost effective, which one has the potential to create more impact, and what if all of them have an equally important role to play, then what should be the ideal mix of all of these different technologies, right? It's not like a person will be cycling 10 kilometers to work every day. You still need a bus, you still need a suburban rail for it. And if that's the case, then what should be the strategy into doing this, into answering this question, how to shift people to these modes of transport, right? So there are two ways to go about it. One is to directly look at the people. and understand what is the problems they face from their point of view and try to address them. The second is to look from the supply side, or more from the top infrastructure, or from the government point of view, and say how can they facilitate, or how can the industry, or how can the different Ola cabs, or the different mobility service providers facilitate this shift from their private vehicles to these shared modes of transport, or non-motorized modes of transport for that matter. One is the awareness nudge, where you go about doing awareness campaigns, or you design experiments where you nudge people into shifting from a private vehicle to a public transport. And an example of a nudge would be, there's a study that I came across where in an organization, they decided to give more amount of holidays to people who were using incentivize people by through providing more amount of holidays for people who were using public mode of transport or shared mode of transport, right? So even carpooling was being considered, and people who were using their private vehicles or their private two-wheelers to come into the office were not given any benefit. So that's a nudge. It's like a carrot and stick approach that you can deploy to shift people, right? The other one is from the supply point of view. So how can these modes of transport be made more accessible to the people? How can these modes of transport be made more affordable, comfortable, safe? So when I talk about, walking and cycling, right? In my city where I live in Delhi, right? I can't see a single cycling lane. I can't see a single footpath. Now, if you want people to actually move to these non-motorized modes of transport, right? So what are the strategies? I'll have to provide this infrastructure. How can I provide it? How can I work with the urban local bodies, or how can I work with the state governments and so on to facilitate the infrastructure that's needed for them, right? And what are the different tools or technologies that I can develop that will be helpful for these mobility service providers, which are these Yulu, Vogo, right? These bike sharing options and so on. How can I help them, right? With regards to bus and metro rail, how can I make them more comfortable? How can I make them more accessible, affordable, right? How can I have a bus running through the most densely populated areas of the city? When I was trying to map out what is the distribution of the bus stops in Delhi and where are the densely located populations in Delhi, right? I found that there are about 40% of the low income groups that do not have any bus stops in their accessible distance. For 400 meters, they did not have any bus stops. And these are the population that are more likely to depend on public transport, right? They are not going to purchase their own car. They're not going to purchase their own two-wheeler. So understanding how to make these bus transport systems more accessible and also making them more affordable, right? Making them more comfortable. So also increasing the frequency of these buses so that you don't have to wait a lot of time at these bus stops to get to the place that you want to get to, right? So these are some of the detailed questions that we sort of try to answer through our research. The next is alternate fuels. So electricity, hydrogen, and the biofuels, a larger group of biofuels, which is ethanol, methanol, biodiesel, blends, and so on. Everything is included in this biofuels category. So these are the three possible alternate fuel options. There could be more. I'm restricting it only to these three.
Yeah, I think Harsimran, you answered one of the questions by Vahidullah also while you were talking. I just want to point that out, that his question was electric vehicles face hurdles of limited driving range and lack of charging infrastructure. So I think you covered that question. I just wanted to point that out from what you spoke.
Sure. Yeah, actually, the driving distance, right, for electric vehicles. So we carried out a pan-India survey in 2019, and we covered 1960 Indian cities. We had respondents of about 3,700 respondents we covered. And when we asked them, what is your driving range, which is the mode of transport you use? And we also asked them, do you like electric vehicles? Do you know about them? And are you going to purchase it? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of electric vehicles? So we found that 70% of the people travel only about 10 kilometers per day. But of the people who use cars, their round trip distance per day is only 20 kilometers. And they also rated that, there's no adequate charging infrastructure, but you don't need it. You're traveling only 20 kilometers per day. So I think that's more of this thing, a comfortable sort of issue. You're not more comfortable, what if this happens, what if that, but that's not happening. You're not doing so many kilometers per day. So that was one of the issues that we found, right? So this is where and I think the awareness campaigns, or educating people more on the way technology works, the way electric vehicles work, and educating them how beneficial it is for them to shift from their petrol car to a diesel car, is where that comes in. So when I talk about alternate fuels, just continuing with the presentation, when I talk about alternate fuels, we think about what is the best strategy, how to shift people from the petrol and diesel vehicles to using electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, and so on. Again, awareness and nudges from the people's point of view. Then you have from the supply point of view, manufacturers and so on, and the government and so on, looking at how to make them affordable, how to make them more accessible, right? And this is where the current electric vehicle subsidies that are already in place by different state governments and also the central government. They have provided some subsidies on electric two-wheelers, buses, three-wheelers, and so on, so that people are able to purchase this new technology and use it. And then from the auto industry point of view, right? The auto industry today contributes 7% to the India's GDP. That's huge compared to any other industry that I know. And how to directly shifting them from combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles is going to create a lot of disruption. So how to create have a good value chain already in place, how to create a good electric vehicle ecosystem, how to have the workforce for it, right? The kind of the skills that you need to manufacture a diesel car or a petrol car is very different from the kind of skills you need to manufacture an electric car, because there's more of electronics in electric cars. There are more of mechanical parts and moving parts in the other combustion engine vehicles. So that's the kind of issues that are needed to be looked into. So I'll just give you an example of a study that we released last year. We tried to, the question for us was whether 30%, what is the impact of 30% electric vehicle sales in 2030? And the reason why we were looking at this research question is because there's a lot of talk about, India's target should be 30%. India has already signed an agreement with the Clean Energy Ministerial, where they had said that by 2030, we'll have 30% of the total vehicle sales that will be electric. So we try to identify what are the gains and what are the trade-offs as well of such a move. We find that, of course, the GHG emissions are reduced. There's a lot of air pollution that's avoided. So a lot of crude oil import bill also that's saved. So you save about 1.1 lakh crore on the crude oil import bill, right? That's a lot of savings. Then through manufacturing of electric vehicles, you're able to generate value. You're able to generate a market size of 2.1 lakh crores. You're able to generate about 1.2 lakh jobs in the manufacturing space only. And also, when we look at from the consumer's point of view, there will be 9% to 20% savings, ranging from a person who owns a two-wheeler to a person who owns a car or a bus. It's the range of the savings that a person will have. So this means that, even if a person is saving, if I am saving 100 rupees on EV, I'll be using that 100 rupees somewhere else. So that's where the circular economy, the circular effect of this particular benefit comes into play. We also found some trade-offs, just like skipping over it. The point is that there are a lot of trade-offs as well of every different technology, but there are definitely ways to tackle them, and we also studied them, not in detail, but we identified that these are some of the options. Yeah, and why I do what I do is because the reason why why I'm so interested in policy research is because the kind of there's a lot of patience that's required. There's a years of research that's required. For example, for the Kigali Amendment, which was an amendment to the Montreal Protocol. So there was this chlorofluorocarbon phase down that was started in Montreal Protocol, where they said that, it depletes the ozone layer, so we need to work on phasing it out. And then you had the amendment saying that, the HFC are not so good actually. You should phase out them also. But there was a years of body of research that was required to make this push. And today, this month, India actually ratified it. And it's good to see that these policies are finally coming into place. So also National Hydrogen Energy Mission that I contributed to a little bit of it, and that was finally announced. So it really feels great to have finally made an impact. And also the other reason why it's interesting is because this is a scale of impact. If you work on a particular pilot, if the pilot works out, then there's a avenue for you to take back the findings to the Ministry of different ministries. In this case, we took back the findings to the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and informed them on the upcoming policy on distributed renewable energy for livelihoods. So what I'm trying to say is that the impact is huge if it works. It's a lot of patience that's required though. Yeah, so this is the slide that I'll cover a little bit in detail. So when I talk about the policy research space in the green economy, these are the different kinds of spaces that are available. So you either have an option of working on renewables, energy efficiency, power, cooking fuels. Mobility is where I come in. Climate risk, so things like cyclones, floods, and so on, why that's happening. Climate geoengineering, so this is about carbon capture technologies. How can we capture carbon from the space and so on, and also working on how to mitigate water pollution, air pollution, and how to make agriculture more sustainable. Are the different sort of areas that are there, and the kind of work that or the kind of different kind of the areas that are there in the policy research are. One is the core research, where you follow an academic sort of this thing, research background, right? You have qualitative and quantitative. It's not just that you deal with numbers. There are qualitative aspects as well. You carry out research, interviews with people, and you try to qualitatively assess whether the policy that the government has introduced are actually reaching people or not, or they are really happy with it or not. So that's where the qualitative part comes into play. The second is a data analysis. So I think if you have skills in Python, R, Stata, Excel, Microsoft Excel, if you have an advanced skill on it, that's really going to come handy in the policy research space. So it's this is one other area. There's energy modeling. It's a very niche group, I would say, where people try to model, if today India plans to go 100% electric vehicles, then what will be the impact 100 years down the line, 50 years down the line, 30 years down the line? How will the whole scenario of India look like? Take into account not just the transport sector, but other sectors as well. So there's a lot of economics also involved, and also there's a lot of understanding that you will develop while you work on energy modeling as to how the different industries function, how the macroeconomic part of the energy modeling works. Then there's the engagement with the decision maker. So I think this is very important because most of the, like I mentioned in my previous slide, we are a bridge between the academic and the policy makers, right? So you need to constantly engage with the decision makers to take your research to them. So and oftentimes you, as a researcher, you're often more involved in your desk research or your ground research and so on, but there's a specific skill that's needed in engaging with them, and that's where the engagement with decision maker comes in. And also there's communication. So we have a really cool outreach team that develops all these cool videos, these cool cartoons, and we build all these reports and so on, right? And constantly tweet it out through different social media channels and so on to shout at every people, this is what our research is saying, this is what you should be working on, listen to us, this is what you found. So that's where the communication bit comes into place. Now, it's a multidisciplinary place. And why I say is that, like Janvi mentioned in the beginning, I have an electrical engineering background, and then I have done some renewable energy engineering masters. And then I came here. I have these other people who have done urban planning and are working in the mobility space. And we have this social sciences people who have done social sciences and also economics that are working along with me in my same team, right? The people from law background as well, who are working on some of the discom tariffs. What are the different tariffs, what are the different things that are there. I'm also all I'm trying to say is this multidisciplinary. You don't need to have you don't need to go through a dedicated public policy research course or a public policy course that's already there in some of the universities to enter the space. It could be anything, it could be doing anything. The skills are transferable, and it's very easy to enter into this space.
Right. I think this is a very, very important point. A lot of people asked us questions about this in the previous feedback forms as well. So you answered it really aptly. And I'm very glad that you've put the names of the institutions that people can check out. So I think our audience can just take like a screenshot, and also we'll be sharing this in the resource pack as well with the audience. Thanks a lot.